In a small town in upstate New York, the brutal murder of 22-year-old college student Jessica Lane stunned the quiet community of Fairview. She had been found in her apartment, strangled, her body staged in a way that suggested the killer wanted to send a message. Her bedroom window had been shattered, and her laptop was missing, but there were no fingerprints, no signs of forced entry, just silence, and a trail that quickly turned cold. Within 48 hours, police arrested Daniel Reyes, a 19-year-old grocery store clerk who lived 2 blocks from Jessica. He had no criminal record, no history of violence, and, according to his family, no relationship with Jessica. But Daniel had been seen near her building the night before. He also fit the vague description of a tall male with dark hair, spotted by a neighbor. Under pressure to make an arrest, police brought Daniel in for questioning. What followed was a 12-hour interrogation, without a lawyer present. No food, no sleep, no breaks. At hour 8, Daniel began to crack. Magnifying glass tilted left the power of interrogation. False confessions don't happen because someone is guilty. They happen because the mind breaks under pressure. And that's exactly what Daniel's interrogation became. A psychological breakdown caught on tape. Detectives told him they had evidence. They didn't. They told him they knew he did it. They didn't. They said if he confessed, he'd go home sooner. At hour 10, Daniel started to question himself. I don't remember doing it, but maybe I did? By hour 12, Daniel signed a written confession. He admitted to killing Jessica even though he didn't, and he believed it. Television viewers, how could this happen? This isn't just one story. It's part of a larger pattern that's swept through the criminal justice system for decades. From the Central Park 5 to Brendan Dassey, innocent people are manipulated into confessing crimes they didn't commit, sometimes just to end the nightmare of being questioned for hours on end. For many viewers, it's a shocking truth. The brain can be convinced of a lie, especially when exhausted, fearful, or young. And the results? Decades in prison, destroyed families, justice derailed. In Daniel's case, his confession was enough to bring charges. Evidence would come later, or so they thought. Brain psychological breakdown or strategy. Experts in false confessions say the Reid technique, a popular interrogation method used by U.S. police, is built on psychological manipulation. It involves isolating the suspect, confronting them aggressively, and offering false hope. Just confess and this ends. This isn't about physical torture. It's mental chess, and suspects, especially young ones, often lose. Daniel's story is just one of many. But in this story, we'll pull back the curtain on what really happens in those windowless rooms. You'll meet the psychologists, defense attorneys, and exonerees who know the system from the inside out. When you imagine a confession, you probably think of a guilty person breaking down under the weight of guilt. But the truth is far darker. Some confessions aren't about guilt at all. They're about control, fear, and exhaustion. Daniel Reyes didn't kill Jessica Lane, but his confession, written after 12 hours of pressure, was vivid and detailed. He mentioned a window the one police said was broken. He described a struggle, just like the detectives had implied. To outsiders, it looked like guilt, but psychologists knew better. Test tube inside the psychology of compliance. False confessions often come down to 2 critical concepts: compliance and internalization. Compliance is when a suspect admits guilt simply to escape a high-pressure situation, even when they know they're innocent. Internalization is more disturbing. It's when the suspect actually comes to believe they did it. Both happened to Daniel. After hours of confrontation, isolation, and suggestion, Daniel's resistance faded. Detectives told him his fingerprints were found. They weren't. They said there was DNA. There wasn't. They suggested he blacked out, and that his memory would come back if he cooperated. He wanted to believe it could all be over, so he told them what they wanted to hear. Brain memory is malleable. Memory isn't a hard drive. It's reconstructed every time we recall it, and under intense psychological stress, that reconstruction can be tampered with. Research shows that false memories can be planted, especially in young people or those with cognitive vulnerabilities. In one experiment, Researchers convinced participants they had committed a crime as a teenager. Within days, the subjects could remember the event in vivid detail, despite it being completely fabricated. Sound familiar? That's exactly what happened to Daniel. Detectives didn't just ask what he remembered. They told him what must have happened. Eventually, his brain filled in the blanks. Movie camera viewers, would you confess? Let's stop here and ask the viewers directly. What would you do if you were kept in a small room for 12 hours, told you were guilty, and promised freedom if you just signed a piece of paper? Most people think they'd hold firm. But studies show that innocent people are actually more likely to waive their right to a lawyer because they believe the truth will protect them. That belief is deadly. Magnifying glass tilted right, the problem with the Reed technique. The Reed technique, still used in law enforcement across the US, is based on behavioral assumptions, like whether a suspect avoids eye contact or fidgets. But countless psychological studies have proven these signs are unreliable. Under Reed, investigators confront the suspect with accusations. They cut off denials. They offer a theme, e.g., maybe it was an accident, and they present false evidence, legally allowed in most U.S. jurisdictions. It's not designed to find the truth. It's designed to extract a confession. And in Daniel's case, it worked, until the evidence didn't line up. Balance scale, a crumbling case. 2 weeks after Daniel's arrest, forensic results came back. No fingerprints matched. The DNA under Jessica's fingernails didn't belong to him. The laptop was found, wiped clean in a pawn shop, sold by a known burglar with no connection to Daniel. And yet, the confession still held weight. The prosecution didn't drop the case. Instead, they suggested Daniel had an accomplice, or that the evidence had been tainted. The system didn't want to admit it had gotten it wrong. Puzzle piece, a pattern, not an exception. Daniel's story isn't rare. According to the Innocence Project, roughly 30% of wrongful convictions overturned by DNA evidence involved false confessions. Why? Because juries believe confessions, even if they make no logical sense. Once a confession is introduced, it colors every piece of evidence after it. Even innocent behavior starts to look guilty. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell. Daniel Reyes had confessed. His signature was on the statement. A jury wouldn't need much more. Even though the DNA didn't match. Even though the timeline didn't add up. Even though he maintained his innocence in every appearance after that night. The confession still ruled everything. Balance scale, the power of a confession in the courtroom. Prosecutors love confessions. Once a defendant admits guilt, even falsely, the case becomes nearly unwinnable for the defense. Jurors trust confessions. To most people, no one would ever admit to murder unless they did it. What they don't realize is this. False confessions are incredibly persuasive, even when they make no sense. In Daniel's case, his defense attorney presented the DNA reports. He showed security camera footage placing Daniel miles away from the scene within the critical time frame. But still, the confession haunted the trial. The prosecutor pointed to it again and again. He confessed. He gave details only the killer would know. But those details? They came from the detectives themselves, subtly leaked during hours of interrogation. Brain expert witnesses, explaining the unthinkable. Daniel's team brought in Dr. Elaine Gardner, a psychologist specializing in false memory formation and interrogation psychology. She explained the tactics used to wear Daniel down. She highlighted how mentally vulnerable suspects, especially younger or sleep-deprived ones, often surrender to psychological pressure. She told the court, the human brain is not built to withstand 12 hours of accusation without consequence. But the jury still looked skeptical. Why? Because the confession was recorded. Daniel's face was calm, his voice steady. He didn't look coerced. Movie camera, the problem with video confessions. Here's what viewers need to understand. When people see a video of someone confessing, they assume it's the whole story. But Daniel's confession video? It didn't include the 10 hours of psychological breakdown that happened beforehand. It didn't show the threats of life in prison, the false claims of evidence, or the long silence and stress. Most interrogation videos start at the confession, not the process that led to it. This is one of the biggest flaws in the system. Confessions are recorded, but the manipulation that causes them rarely is. Magnifying glass tilted left viewers. Would you trust the tape? Pause and ask yourself, if you saw someone calmly confess to murder on video, would you believe it, even if all the forensics proved otherwise? Be honest, because that's what prosecutors count on. Adult balance scale, the trial's turning point. Just as Daniel's case looked hopeless, a break came from an unexpected source, an anonymous tip. Someone had overheard a man in a halfway house bragging about getting away with murder. His name was Marcus Dale, a known burglar with a violent past. Detectives reran the DNA under Jessica Lane's nails. This time, they included Marcus in the database. It matched. Suddenly, everything changed. The prosecutors had no choice. They dropped the charges against Daniel. But not before he had spent 14 months in jail, lost his job, and had his reputation destroyed. Chart decreasing, no apology, no accountability. Even after the charges were dropped, no one from law enforcement apologized. The detectives stood by their tactics. The DA's office issued a brief statement. New evidence has come to light, and we have dismissed the case in the interest of justice. But justice for who? Daniel was free, but his life was forever altered. And Marcus Dale? He eventually confessed too casually, without pressure. His story matched the evidence from day one. Puzzle piece, this is bigger than one case. Daniel's story is far from unique. Across the U.S., false confessions have sent hundreds of innocent people to prison, many for decades. The system is slow to change. Courts continue to trust confessions. Jurors continue to believe them, and law enforcement continues to use tactics that blur the line between truth and fiction. Compass, what comes next? In the final chapter, we follow Daniel's fight not just for freedom, but for accountability. He teams up with advocacy groups to push for mandatory recording of entire interrogations, better training for police, and legal protections for vulnerable suspects. And will confront the final question: how many more Daniels are out there, locked away not because of what they did, but because of what they were pressured to say? Daniel Reyes walked out of jail a free man, but freedom came with a bitter taste. He wasn't greeted with apologies, compensation, or even acknowledgement that the system had failed him. Instead, he was left with trauma, debt, a ruined reputation, and a deep question: how many others are still trapped like he was, believing no one will ever believe them? This chapter isn't just Daniel's ending. It's about what comes next, for him, for the justice system, and for the innocent still behind bars. Brain, the psychological aftermath of a false confession. In the months after his release, Daniel struggled with PTSD. He had nightmares about the interrogation room, the pressure, the lies, the mental chess game he lost. He told a local podcast, "They didn't just take my freedom, they made me doubt myself. I started asking if maybe I really had done something and blacked out. That's how deep they got into my mind." False confessions don't just put people in prison, they shatter their identity. The trauma doesn't end when the sentence does. Balance scale, exonerees fight for reform and recognition. Daniel joined forces with organizations like the Innocence Project, Center on Wrongful Convictions, and Recording Interrogations for Justice. He became a public speaker, traveling to universities, police departments, and legal forums to explain what really happened. He showed the cracks in the system. No laws requiring full-length video recordings of interrogations in most states. No penalties for detectives who lie or withhold truth during questioning. No mental health evaluations before police can start interrogations. No standardized limits on how long suspects can be questioned. And most critically, no compensation laws in many states for people wrongfully imprisoned. Daniel got nothing. No financial help. No therapy. No apology. Just freedom and the scars that came with it. Magnifying glass tilted right, how the system could change, but hasn't yet. Some places have tried to fix it. Illinois, New York, and Oregon have passed laws banning deceptive tactics in juvenile interrogations. A few cities like San Francisco and Seattle now require full video recordings. But nationwide, there is still no federal mandate for any of it. And in many states, confessions, even false ones, continue to trump DNA, alibis, and common sense. Daniel asks, why do we trust the confession more than the science? Film projector, when the camera rolls from the beginning. One of the biggest pushes Daniel advocates for is full-length, start-to-finish video of all interrogations. Not just the confession, everything leading up to it. This would expose how detectives feed details to suspects, how long they're held without food, sleep, or legal counsel, the shift from conversation to manipulation. Transparency is the cure to coercion. As Daniel says, if the police believe their methods are just, they should have no problem recording everything. Megaphone turning pain into power. In 2025, Daniel helped lobby for the Innocent Voices Act, a proposed federal bill that would mandate full video recordings of all felony interrogations, bar deceptive tactics in cases involving juveniles and mentally vulnerable suspects, provide automatic access to legal counsel after 6 hours of questioning, offer immediate state compensation to exonerees. The bill hasn't passed yet, but it's gaining ground, and Daniel won't stop until it does. He's met other exonerees, men who served 10, 20, even 40 years for crimes they didn't commit, all because they cracked under pressure and signed the paper. He says their stories are fuel. We were all made to feel like monsters, but now we're making sure the real monsters, the ones who abuse the system, are the ones exposed. Compass, the final truth. Why do innocent people confess? Because they're scared. Because they're manipulated. Because they're convinced no one will believe them unless they cooperate. Because after 10, 12, or 18 hours alone in a room, anything feels better than staying silent. False confessions are not rare. They are not mistakes. They are symptoms of a broken interrogation system. Daniel Reyes survived it, but thousands haven't. Television to you, the viewer. If this story shook you, it should. It's time to stop trusting confessions blindly and start demanding change. Subscribe if you believe justice should be fair, and share this story to make sure others learn what really happens behind those locked doors. Because the truth can't set you free if no one is willing to believe it. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell.